is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China's most important annual political gatherings have concluded this week. Known as the Two Sessions, China's top legislative organ, the National People's Congress, and the top political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, converge every year to review the government's performance in the past year and thrash out its priorities in the year ahead. 2021's gatherings have been particularly important, coming in the wake of unique times in world history, as countries scramble to recover economically, contain COVID-19 and revive multilateralism. So what key announcements came out of this year's Two Sessions, and how are they likely to shape China-Africa relations in 2021? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. And on the sidelines of the Two Sessions, Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a press conference with both domestic and international press, where he gave key pointers to China's foreign policy priorities over the next year. Let's take a look.
Middle East News Agency. It is now more than 1 year since the outbreak of COVID-19, and the African countries still face difficulties to deal with it, especially regarding the availability of vaccines, and they still also suffer from loans difficulties. As China and the African countries celebrated last year the 20th anniversary of the founding of FOCAC, and the next session of FOCAC will be held in Senegal this year. So, how China attributed to help African countries to address the challenges they are facing, and what is China going to do in order to further upgrade China-Africa cooperation? Thank you.
I'm very happy to answer questions from African friends. China and Africa enjoy a profound friendship forged during the struggle for national independence and liberation. We are comrades in arms, as well as brothers and sisters. This bond of friendship is growing ever stronger as time goes by. China and Africa are perpetual good friends and good partners with a shared future. We celebrated the 20th anniversary of FOCAC last year. Over the past 2 decades, we have formulated and implemented 10 cooperation plans and 8 major initiatives. Our two-way trade has increased 20 times, and China's direct investment in Africa has grown 100 times. There are now 150 pairs of sister cities. China-Africa cooperation stands as a model of South-South cooperation and a fine example of international cooperation with Africa. To help African countries fight the pandemic and bring the economy back on track is a top priority for China-Africa cooperation. Last year, President Xi Jinping initiated and hosted the extraordinary China-Africa Summit on Solidarity and announced a host of new support measures. We've provided close to 120 batches of emergency supplies to Africa and sent medical expert teams to 15 African countries. We have started to provide COVID vaccines to 35 African countries and the AU Commission. The construction of the Africa CDC headquarters, a project for which we are glad to provide assistance, has started, and cooperation between 30 pairs of Chinese and African hospitals is well underway. Well, the FOCAC meeting to be held this year in Senegal will serve as another opportunity for advancing China-Africa cooperation. We will support Africa's efforts to defeat the virus and strengthen public health governance, accelerate industrialization, and build up capacity for self-generated development, speed up African integration, and embrace the trend of economic globalization, and find political solutions to hotspot issues and maintain peace and stability on the continent. We will work with Africa to pursue high-quality Belt and Road cooperation and build an even stronger community with a shared future to drive Africa's development and revitalization. Thank you.
And let's broaden this discussion a little bit more. And Mr. Liam Lee is joining us from Beijing via Zoom. He's a council member of the China-Africa People's Friendship Association. Dr. David Monyai is joining us from our Johannesburg studio. He's the co-director of the University of Johannesburg's Confucius Institute. Thank you all for joining us today. Mr. Liam, start off with you as you're watching the proceedings in Beijing. This year's two sessions come against a background of a world economic downturn triggered by a global pandemic. Developments coming out of China's prime annual meetings do naturally draw international attention. From your perspective, though, give us some of the highlights to take note of first on the domestic level and on the global level.
Yes, actually, this section is very important. All the delegates and members discuss how China's achievement in the next 5 years. And if you look the report from the government and what the delegate and member discussed, you can easily find that China have a totally new way to improve, especially during the after the pandemic era. The government put the digital economy in a more important way, and they also emphasize on the transition of the economy model. It means that those industries may consuming more sources may be replaced by those digital or service industry.
Dr. Munya, in your assessment, though, of the speeches coming out of the two sessions, what is your opinion of the priority areas? Let me get your feeling here, both globally and in relation to Africa, Dr. Munya.
Indeed, I think when we look at the transition that my colleague alluded to, I think from our perspective here in Africa, looking deeply what's happening at a global level, it's a transition in which China's economy outlook will be quite different since the opening in 1978 to now. And this is due to a number of factors. One is the trade disputes and tension with the United States, where from a much more friendly, I think we're going to see a relationship between the United States and China that is defined by stiff competition on one hand and rivalry in a number of areas. As well as domestically within China itself, the economy has been strongly depending on foreign direct investments. I think from now going forward, we're going to see much of what they have defined as a dual circulation, whereby China will depend much more on domestic consumption as well as foreign direct investment. And therefore, the role of technology will be quite critical, independence of, from Western countries, where China would have to make its own key technologies, such as chips, as we enter the fourth industrial revolution. When it comes to relation with Africa, I think you're going to see more strengthening of the relationship, moving much more to new areas of focus through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation.
I want to look at that question of trade a little bit more. And Mr. Liam, the foreign minister actually talked about trade with Africa, you know, having increased about 20 times. He also talked about foreign direct investment having increased by about 100 times. I mean, what kind of trade is happening at the moment? Because we know that trade between China and Africa has been on the rise over the last 10 years, but was disrupted last year because of the pandemic. What is going on in terms of trade with the continent?
Actually, it is a really hot topic about the China-Africa trade relationship during the sessions. I met many delegates and members who investment in Africa from those private or state-owned company. They are very eager to know what's happening about the common market of the whole Africa continent. And as you may know that nowadays, the very multi-level China and Africa trade relationship from those Southern Minor Cooper or to those digital products like the Huawei. They have a lot of big amount of investment in the safety equipment in the bustling downtown area. So I think is really multi-level. And China side, from Beijing side, we're very good like to see you Africa continent have a common market. I'm sure that there was more investment from Beijing to Africa in the near future.
All right, let me return back to what is happening on the continent. And Dr. Munyai, the foreign minister, he praised the China-Africa relationship as a model for South-South cooperation. As an international observer, what are you looking out for specifically when it comes to the interests of the African continent?
The continent is the least developed continent in the world. And China has played a critical role in assisting the continent on a number of areas. One, China massive investments on the continent has attracted other players. I think our relationship with European Union, with the United States, Japan, has also increased. And therefore, I think when you look at Africa, it has always depended on exporting raw material. China and the manner in which the discussions are going on based on 2018, there's a need to move into new areas. These new areas, we've seen the relationship entering, China signing an agreement with Ethiopia, for instance, of sending a satellite that will deal with issues of communication, agriculture, the issues of health, and with the pandemic has worsened the situation and requiring much more assistance in those areas, as well as really training of health workers, as well as boosting the Africa CDC in Addis Ababa. There are quite a number of other areas that my colleague in Beijing has mentioned, technology and the role of Huawei and a number of other Chinese companies that are playing constructive role on the African continent. So we're going to see much more strengthening of this relationship, paving the way for a new era, which will be, in a way, win-win to all parties if it is structured and implemented well.
Mr. Liam, so Dr. Munyai has talked about new areas that China would perhaps engage with Africa following the COVID-19 pandemic and following the economic downturn that Africa had over the last year. Now, when we talk of China-Africa trade, which areas do you see that China is going to engage in, to help restart economies on the continent and create jobs?
Definitely, I think it's a health. If I may name some industry or sectors, definitely the first one is the health sector. As you know that the China is very eager to, we have the medical teams in the history with the China-Africa. But in this pandemic area, I talked with some members from the CPPCC. They're looking for investment in hospital or even the pharma local manufacturing in Africa. So I think this sector should be the one of the very booming one in the near future for China-Africa trade investment. And secondly, I think it's about the people-to-people exchange, some culture things, sport exchange, or the young people to young people, culture, music, those service industry.
Let's talk about the health sector for a minute, because China says its top priority for China-African cooperation now is to help African countries combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Liam, what mechanisms have been spelled out by China to achieve this?
Yes, actually, China has an announcement that China donates the first Africa CDC in Ethiopia. And if you look at the news, there are more and more Chinese vaccines from Beijing or Guangzhou to fly back to the Africa continent. That's China donating those vaccines. And what's the news or message I got from the two sessions? China have some new technology and more vaccines, more technology lines vaccines manufactured in China. So I think if the China may transfer those manufacturing lines from domestic market to Africa, so I think that's they also maybe come true in the next few years.
Dr. Monyae, but ultimately, though, there are lessons for Africa here in terms of becoming more productive and independent in the future. How do you see Africa, breaking from that mold?
I think Africa has to unite through the AU, coordinate and ensure that the knowledge and the skills in the pharmaceutical, in the production, in the research on vaccines, which does exist here in South Africa, a bit in Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, Algeria, and work on how to coordinate among Africans and ensure that we do not depend on donations when it comes to life-saving medicine. We need to be self-reliant when it comes to that. It will be a long-term plan. However, we need to learn from what has happened with the pandemic, COVID-19, as we move in. I think the world will face more pandemics. We cannot constantly relying on developed countries and our friends for donations. We have to do something as Africans. That means more resources need to be devoted to health-related issues as security. Security does not only mean military injections of funds. We need to equally look at pandemics as an enemy that should be fought as we do with what we perceived as external threats to national security and sovereignty.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment and take a short break. But when we come back, we'll have more analysis on the two sessions and Africa in 2021. To stay with us. Well, earlier I spoke to Professor Peter Kagwanja. He's the president and CEO of the Africa Policy Institute, to get his thoughts on this year's two sessions and their significance for Africa. Professor, thank you for joining us. In your assessment of the speeches coming out of the two sessions, what is your opinion of the priority areas, first globally and particularly in respect to Africa?
Globally, I think there are a number of concerns, or rather areas of focus. One, of course, is the pandemic that has ravaged the world. It's COVID-19. And basically, the idea is how to mobilize solidarity around confronting it, how to intervene on behalf of the weaker part of the world, particularly the developing countries, and that is key. The second, obviously, is how to foster multilateral cooperation after almost five years of a kind of anarchic world order, which was dominated by power struggles which undermine multilateralism. That is also very important. And I think the third one is how to rejuvenate, how to reconstruct the global economy, bring it back onto its feet after the devastation that has gone there. And with that, of course, trade and expansion of economic relations across the globe.
So when you look When you look at the reconstructing the global economy, because China has set its growth target to about 6% for 2021, how do you see that assisting in resuscitating the global economy?
That is going to be great, because China is one of the countries, or perhaps the only country, that managed to contain COVID-19 very early enough, and therefore it enabled its industry to continue producing in spite or despite the kind of environment that we have found ourselves in. And therefore, the Chinese industry is going to feed into the world industry. That's going to mean that China is realistic in its estimation of 6% growth. But more so, there has to be, particularly in regard to Africa, a kind of division of labor, where some of the products will have to be finished on the continent or the destination market. Then this much applies to vaccines related to COVID-19, plus other products. In other words, the production chain, the value chain, and what we're calling the chains of production must be continued into the area where the consumer market is.
All right, Professor Peter Kagwanja joining us there. Thank you very much for your insights on the two sessions. Let's now continue with our discussion. Mr. Liam Lee in Beijing and David Monyai in Johannesburg. Dr. Monyai, African economies have had a devastating economic downturn because of the pandemic of the last year particularly. How do you see China's economic growth target, though, impacting the continent?
I think China will continue to do extremely well, as its economy has really done extremely well under the pandemic. We are going to see a strengthened China that is more likely, as predictions are made quite clear, by 2027. Chinese economy will be number one, surpassing the United States. And it is also getting into high-tech areas in which Africa is quite weak. And therefore, I think Africa has to up its game when it comes to skills, when it comes to ability to produce technologies that are critical for a new economy and compete with China. And therefore, I think you're going to see Africans uniting around key issues to turn the entire narrative of Africa. That's stopping exporting raw material. We need to beneficiate the products. We have lots and lots of critical minerals that are needed globally, including rare earth that is in short supply. I think we need to ensure that we don't export jobs, we increase employment, we tighten our common trade agreement that has been signed, and ensure that we enter in a much more clear, friendly trade agreement, free trade agreement, sign a free trade agreement with China, and increase African products onto the Chinese market. And other areas, it is to do with tourism and people to people. There are quite a lot of areas in terms of the service sector where the two could really increase and ensure that everyone benefits out of this relationship.
And this is particularly important coming against the background of the recent launching of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. How do you see China, though, assisting in the integration of Africa, particularly in 2021, against the background of its economic targets this year?
I think we're going to see a lot of changes. The rise of e-commerce. Africa has lots of advantages in terms of its population, a youthful population, and the youth in particular, when it comes to digital economy, it's going to really drive African economy into the future. When it comes to infrastructure, I think infrastructure is needed to strengthen regional integration, continental integration, and China continues to play a critical role with many of its companies on the African continent. We have China Construction Bank, we have your Huawei, we have a number of these companies. And I think we need more of that to ensure that as China moves with the Belt Road Initiative, it becomes in sync with Africa's own Agenda 2063, particularly on the infrastructure, massive movement of goods and people on the African continent.
Mr. Liam, the two sessions has ended on a positive note here because there's now a renewed confidence in multilateralism after the decline of the last couple of years. How do you see China driving the process now that the US says it is recommitting to multilateralism?
There was latest news. They said China and Washington may discuss some both bilateral relationship in coming months. And if you look the message from the two sessions, China signed many free trade agreement with Europe, with those trade partners in Southeast Asia, and Japan, Korea. And even I mentioned China, the Beijing put quite eager on the opportunities with the trade opportunities with Africa, take the opportunity of the your common market. So I think China was one of the firmly support for the multilateralism, and China will have the firmly support on the multilateralism in the next new year.
Dr. Munyai, we're going to get your winding up comments on that. I want your reaction to that statement. And how do you see Africa, though, benefiting from China's call for more equality at the UN?
We're going to see both Africa and China as continent and a country that are pro-multilateralism. The relationship, I think, is going to really strengthen this multilateral structure. But when it comes to Africa, it's not just a question of multilateralism for its own sake. What Africa is looking forward to is to get the assistance and help of China to transform these very same structures that since their formation in 1945, they are unhelpful, they are undemocratic, less transparent, and Africans need space and participation within the United Nations Security Council, needs a seat or seats within that, and opening of other key important institutions of global governance, particularly the WTO. Good news, we have an African heading that body, but we need more within the IMF, World Bank, where China has more influence. So the relationship between Africa and China will influence a positive move and operation of these institutions in the benefit of Africa's own quest for development.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Very insightful. We'll leave it there for the moment this week on Talk Africa. Thank you to our guests for their insights. Mr. Liam Lee in Beijing. He's a council member of the China-Africa People's Friendship Association, and Dr. David Munyai, co-director of the University of Johannesburg's Confucius Institute. And thank you too for tuning in to this week's discussion. The conversation continues online through our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. See you again next week. For me and the team in Nairobi, it's goodbye.